A Prose Poem by Andrew Mbaruk. Shuffling on Motheriot's windowsill to flute music, it was Sure Shot by the Beastie Boys. On his tiny iPod, a fat gray-brown quail tripped, falling backwards, shrieking squeakily into the frozen sidewalk. Groaning, tried to sit up, slowly collapsed. Mo's clock beeped, continued beeping. Beeps slipped into her ear, slipping in drool from her mouth in a yawn. She sat up on the bed edge, dragged a smooth jade brush through her hair, brown, kinky. Put eyeglasses on, grand, glassy. The room appeared sharply, suddenly. She was in a giant egg-shell. The castle, its creamy colors, egg, she thought, soft in places. She sat and stared ahead, skipped down the glass spiral stairs, slid into the kitchen for a glass of milk. The glass of milk, stared at the glass of milk. The milk sat and looked back, still, white. Good morning, good morning. The voice Daniel Allen's. Dan in rosy, quail-covered pajamas, stumbling into the kitchen, placing a pan on the stove, opening the refrigerator, sitting on a counter, holding his dozen brown eggs in a glass bowl. The quail eggs, all 12, were fried, flipped, and fried. Sausage smell surrounded the two and sizzled. Colored loops attached themselves to Dan's large friendly beard. White lava remained in the bowl, still and white. Entering the creamy kitchen, a third character, Alva Whitman, stretched languidly, Y-shaped, cracking her knuckles. Or freakishly tall, our Alva crawled into the creamy kitchen. Smells good, Alva said in here, and opened the refrigerator. Care for an egg? Or eggs? Dan said. Alva, sure. Over easy, over hard, how? Same difference, it's all egg. Raw? It's all egg. Prove it. Okay, Alva said, pouring her orange juice, and exited the creamy kitchen, searching for a plume. Upstairs, in her room, with a jungle green crayon, Norma Estridge drew herself a happy quail in the left margin of a midway page in her old Icelandic dictionary. The smell of breakfast, spiraling upstairs, leapt into the room on sausage feet. Sexy pig. Norma's eyes, nostrils, mouth, all widened. I wonder, is Mo awake, I hope. This is but an approximation of her thought, for thought, as the reader knows, lives somewhat beyond words. Thought, in accordance with Canadian unrealism, will be represented in English throughout this poem. "How's the headache?" Dan said, forking fried eggs into his bearded mouth. "They're not as bad this morning and yesterday," Mo said. "Just sometimes, now a little," holding the milk glass to her forehead, smiling faintly at the milk as she set it down. Last Monday, Mo lay on the couch in Norma's arms, wailing, "Ow, oh, wow, oh." A sheen of sweat upon the arms, neck, and face, the eyes red and sad. "Yes, I feel our," Mo said, "a lot better, lots." Toast hopped up in the toaster. Mo lifted out the toast carefully, set it on a saucer, and delicately smeared upon the toast the honey. Shredded wheat tumbled into a large china clay bowl on the counter. Norma, joining, filled with milk the bowl, pressed down upon the wheat with a silvery spoon. Pine cones, honey, milk, and ivy float in a china clay bowl. "How are you feeling?" Norma said, sitting at the creamy blue table across from Mo. "Good, better," Mo radiating in Norma's direction the purest joy. Smiling, Mo and Norma, smiling. Mo and Norma, girly painting mistletoes red. Ivy wreathed Dan, stirring eggnog with a swizzle thyrsus. Sausages sizzling. Alva in the adjoining room, in a beanbag chair like a huge collapsing melon, sniffing. Held in her hands her notebook and a gray-brown plume, thinking, sniffing, jotting, sniffing, watching the snow fall slowly and the bank across the street of snow through the bay window, lone wolf blowing and gathering a wreath, words collecting in her notebook, a wreath, white plumes. A sheen of sweat upon the arms, neck, and face, the eyes red and sad. Alva reached out and grabbed her glass of orange juice from the stand. Is it the crest on her head every day, giving her headaches every day? Her crest of diamond, turquoise, pearl, etc. Alva set the glass back and returned to the composition. "We are in an egg," Alva thought she wrote, "on the inside of an egg. Nothing outside. All on the inside, a yolk yoked together. Gray-brown qualia, failure. An egg perfectly round, white, and cold as the Inuit-filled capsules our queens installed in the attic freezer, preserving our Arctic sovereignty. White plumes. From the ivory sign of equality, white plumes. Plumes, plumes. The room blank, a blizzard. Our Alva crawled back into the kitchen. Proved wrong. Mo's dream returned fleetingly, a small gray-brown quail in headphones, and she plunged, Dan's beard in flames, milk graying. Boiling, Mo's head squeezed in a red cushion, the cushion crushing her slowly. Something red and insistent, screaming. Ow, oh, ow. Mo threw her arms around Norma, Norma her arms around Mo. Held her face to hers. Mo, Norma said, ow, oh. Wow, oh. We're going to be late for class with Mr. Purdy if we don't go. Let's get out there in the terrible snow. As professor and poet Hal Purdy said unto his students, open your books to Earl Burney and the poem Vancouver Lights. Mo and Norma entered the classroom and found seats among the McGillionaires. Who wants to read the poem? Zachary Banzai, now read with great dramatic gravity the beauteous poem Vancouver Lights. Thanks, Zachary. It's a poem, blatantly, and certainly one of the poems in Canadian literature. The professor and poet sipped his fragrant and spiked coffee. Vancouver Lights. A poem about Vancouver and its lights. What do you all make of it? A student, his name is Everett Marmeyer, asked the poet a question. Everett's question provoked an improvisational disquisition. Purdy's improvisational disquisition meandered from the question's matter to others, not unrelated, not uninteresting. These matters not unrelated and not uninteresting distracted Purdy from the poem before them for 13 minutes, until the poet recalls that he is, blatantly, a professor. But let's descend deeplier into his world, Earl Burney's world, he said, eyes squinting through their silver circles at the pages of his copy of an anthology of Canadian poetry. Professor Purdy guided them now through the masterfully constructed Anglo-Saxon street, evidently taking a special pleasure in reading to his students the lines, "Here is a ghetto, gotten for Goyim, oh with care denuded, of nigger and kike, no coon smell rankles." Now through Bushed, a truly beautiful and essential Canadian classic, positioning Burney permanently within the Canadian literary canon, a beautiful thing. When they read Burney's beautiful poem The Bear on the Delhi Road, Purdy found himself lecturing on the novel Bear by Marian Engel. Relationships with bears, Purdy said. Write this down. Relationships with bears do not last. Mo raised her hand. What does the novel Bear have to do with this poem by Earl Burney? Purdy's eyes narrowed in their silver circles. All literature is intertextual, he said. Mo would receive a lower grade than Norma in this Canadian poetry class, a C- to her B-. Mo's participation grade 0. Purdy'd claim she'd said nothing in his class, just sat always in the back of the room, a dark mystery. They returned, Mo and Norma, through the oceanic wind and snowfall to their castle, to find seated at the table this young black man, Christian Love, reading a book, Tulips and Chimneys, and swaying to the rhythm of a jazz composition emanating from Dan's laptop speakers. Hey, Christian said. Hello, Norma said. This is Christian, Dan said, raising the volume of the Mingus playing on his laptop. Has anyone ever told you you look like Basquiat? Norma said. Christian, now looking disappointedly across the kitchen at her and shaking his head. No, he said. He doesn't look like Basquiat. You look, Dan said to Christian, exactly like a young James Baldwin. Again our Christian, who presently in his moment of space-time watches unfold from the window of his captor's craft an interstellar war, shook his head in amazement and disapproval. No, Alva said, he looks uncannily like a young Barack Obama, lighting a cigarette, the tobacco cloud filling the great egg castle, its smoky white and yolk. Christian is going to live here a while, Dan said. What? Norma said. Again our Christian. Great bizarre ships everywhere split by bright beams filling this moment of the night infinite. Shook his head in amazement and disapproval. The alternative, Dan said, to leave this Mr. Love frozen to death on the mean streets of Montreal. It's unthinkable. Christian would live with them, eat their food, use their cocaine, dance to their music, until 2 weeks later. Well, Dan said, we're all here. This freezing wind blowing the door open, snowflakes a-swirl about their apartment. And as Norma pushed closed again the door, let us use cocaine then, you and I, Dan said. As the great dark mystery of the sky drops drops of its crystalline purity upon the silver city Montreal. Norma called a taxi. Soon a white taxi approached among the blizzard blur, stopping outside their castle. You all go, Alva said. I'll stay. Staying. And now the driver, whose name is Etienne Trudeau, drove them in that white taxi through their momentous, snowy moment, tolerating barely their niaiserie. Their cocaine dealer, Freddie T.S. Himmler, was a Nazi. Well, not a genuine Nazi, but one of those white hipsters of the era who, considered from our present vantage, can only be called Nazis. His brown bottle brush mustache betrayed a deep love of Hitler and his ideas. His black jean jacket pockets bulged with monies and cocaine. The bottle of Boreal beer in his white bony hand loosened his speech, an outpour infinite of oft-white supremacism-tinged black humor. And Freddie's tight black jeans revealed a small penis and testicles, bony legs, and neon green socks. We'll listen to Fleetwood Mac's Tusk, their best album, Freddie said, selecting the album from among his vinyl. A masterpiece of white music, he laughed. He'd said once of his vinyl, "It's a beautiful medium, vinyl, and I've amassed a beautiful variety of white music. My only problem with these vinyl discs, frankly, is they're black." He laughed and laughed. Setting his beer on a shelf next to a silver-framed painting of a swastika, Freddie began to place the first vinyl disc upon his record player, singing, with a false German accent, "Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler." They, Mo, Norma, Dan, Christian, and Freddie, snorted long lines of pure cocaine, smoking giant spliffs and drinking alcohols, discussing everything, saying nothing. If Canadian literature is characterized by this deep fear and hatred of nature, Mo said, as Atwood says in Survival, if Canadians regard nature as hostile, then what? Dan said. But no one, say nothing, Freddie interjected, to the tune of Fleetwood Mac's song Walk a Thin Line playing on his hi-fi. While I snort this thin line. Now he sniffed a line of cocaine and laughed, a carefree cackle, exactly as some Nazis had laughed, bashing to death Jewish children with bayonets. I forget what I was gonna say, Mo said. The conversation continued its meander. Tusk heard in its glorious entirety. Freddie now played on his iPod the new album by Of Montreal, Skeletal Lamping. Freddie loved the new Of Montreal music entirely for its blackface concept, the band's white songwriter Barnes's black trans character Georgie Fruit, just as Freddie enjoyed Trout Mask Replica solely for its blues appropriation. For Freddie, if there wasn't in an artwork that element of white disrespect, it was not necessarily great art. And if there was in an artwork that element of white disrespect, it was then necessarily great art. Their conversation octopus-like, wriggling in several directions, punctuated by the snorting of pure cocaine, changed as liquid in a lava lamp, newer and newer forms of the same nothing. "The white man can't control us," Freddie laughed. "I think Malcolm X said that." "The white man can't control us," Christian echoed, regarding the swastika in its silver frame. If you asked Freddie why he'd tattooed a swastika over his heart, he'd swear to you it was advanced irony and plainly hilarious. He evidently can. "I've remembered what I was going to say," Mo said, "about CanLit. If Canadian literature, the Canadian poet, regards Canadians as good and their environment, nature, as hostile, then what?" Dan said. "Then why not an inversion of that literary characteristic? A poem, a literary work, some CanLit," Mo suggested. "A novel, perhaps, where nature is good and Canadians are hostile to nature." Christian said, "How about a novel without human characters?" "Life on Earth," Norma said, and sniffed a line of pure cocaine. The four returned to their holy castle in the McGill ghetto, to the sublime chaos, sublime in the Kantian sense, surely not in the Longinian sense of sublime, of Alva's disgusting suicide, her blood dripping from the surface of their table in a terrible pool on the linoleum, Alva supine in the lava, knife protruding from her heart. She'd sliced open her arms, stabbed herself in the stomach, and finally the heart. It would be expected, in a story by some lesser poet, that from then on nothing, like the title of that album by Drake, was the same. But in fact things carried on. "I'll be damned," Dan said, in much the same style, in accordance with Canadian unrealism. Norma flipped open her mobile phone and called the Montreal police. The shock among the four trembling, the four shocked Canadians, a Canadian terror, and, also Canadian, this vile feeling of higher aliveness, the snowfall ceasing, the night still, the deep joy of spooky Christmas alive in their hearts, this devilish Christmas Eve. Christian could sleep in Alva's room. It was a dark and stormy night. Three raccoons ran through the rain to the trash cans outside Mo's and Norma's house on Woodland Drive near Britannia Community Center. Raccoons communicate by growling, hissing, and whistling, but will here present their dialogue in English. "What a novel," one raccoon said, knocking over one can, the lid rolling onto Woodland Drive. "A character dies, suicided by society. We jump 10 years forward in time from Montreal to Vancouver, and now it's raccoons talking in a wet driveway in the moonlight. True folly." "It's not a novel," another raccoon said, clawing open a garbage bag, pulling out of the bag a tattered and burnt Canadian flag with her teeth. "What is it then?" said the third raccoon, knocking over a second can of garbage, the lid rattling onto the concrete nearby. "Because it looks, sounds, and smells like narrative prose fiction to me." "Me too," the first raccoon said, producing from the first opened garbage bag 3 slices of discarded white bread, these now distributed evenly among the group. "It's more like a long prose poem," the second raccoon said, "like the late poetry of James Tate." "But more epic in its structure," the third raccoon said, munching the rain-soggy white bread. "And of course length." A grizzly bear attacked Diane Carey walking the streets of East Vancouver. She turned onto an unfamiliar street, confronted immediately by the mountainous brown furry beast. Claws, teeth, and great force ended the mauled and eaten character screaming as East Vancouver's men and women watched from their homes, from their cars, from a distance. Our Diane screamed despair, rage, a red figure in pools of blood, the bear roaring its joy. The police car stopping by the crime containing a driver arrested by the bear's evil majesty, the car soon disappearing from the scene. The murder soon broadcasted, podcasted, reenacted throughout Canada. The bear question grows to live foremost in the Canadian psyche. Freddie T.S. Himmler releases his great single, "Rename the Band Grizzly Bear After a Person of Color," honoring bear attack victims. The downtown Toronto mural of Diane Carey powerful behind him in the video. With its incisive lyrics and snappy chorus of "Heil Hitler," the song immediately resonated with most Canadians. Bears, very simply the enemy, the influx of polar bears, climate refugees, began raising the nation's ire into a raging fire. Our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, addressing televisually the nation in his now traditional blackface. "We've spoken softly, we've tolerated their kind, and they've lived among us, but enough is enough. The polar bears need to go home. Go home," he said as you'd speak to a child. "That motherfucker," one polar bear yelled at the television, seated at the bar Christian now tended. How does he get away with espousing such clearly incorrect beliefs? "It's the blackface," Christian said. "Ever since he began appearing publicly in blackface, it truly seems he can do no wrong." The Prime Minister left the press scrum satisfied with his performance, but exhausted. Removing privately his blackface makeup, Trudeau whispered, "The things you do," into the mirror, "the things you do to hold on to power," and he laughed, his face half blackface. Softly he sang, "Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. removing the rest of the blackface from his white face. His mobile phone rang. It was Gerald Butts. "How did you escape the quantum realm?" Trudeau said. "And where are you?" "I'm on one of these fucking spaceships." "Spaceships? What spaceships?" "This is it, the end. We've ended Canada." Trudeau smiled in recognition of the deep truth within this literary passage. Canadaism's dead. Long live Canadaism. Something nebulously exact, created before the multiverse's beginning, in the infinite nothing, a godly soliloquy eternal, always already here and in motion. It's probably the mother of 1,000,000,000,000 beings. I do not know what to call it. Trudeau gazed deeply and seriously into his own eyes in the mirror. What had he done? "I thought we were calling it Canada." It would be difficult to say with certitude whether he'd been taken by space aliens aboard their ship, for it seems more likely to have been his delusion, the many spaceships. Wouldn't you agree? Though Gerald Butts was never seen again. The evidence so strongly pointed in the direction of Trudeau's murdering Butts. Not directly, but he'd hired someone to murder Butts. That was the theory. So strongly did the evidence point in the direction of Trudeau's murdering Butts that he, Trudeau, was found to be in violation of the Canadian law against homicide. Trudeau, though, he could always count on his Trudeau maniacs. In blackface, the Prime Minister ran out before the press, sang "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," and the supposed murder was transformed in the Canadian psyche. It was no longer murder. It was murder he'd overcome to become a better man. Better than any person of color. Certainly better than Andrew Scheer and the Conservative Party of Canada. Andrew Scheer hates homosexuals. He compared gay marriage to dogs. He dances on the graves of murdered Indigenous women. When Justin Trudeau dances on their graves, he does it in blackface. Blackface he's grown to understand as an essential part of his being. Blackface he's cognizant of as problematic and harmful in its meaning. Blackface he'll overcome to become a better man, better than any person of color, certainly better than Jagmeet Singh. The one polar bear looked up from his beer at Christian. "So, the blackface, it's the reason our Trudeau II rules the country, eh?" "Oh, without a doubt, yes," Christian said. "I've never heard anything so shiningly true," the polar bear said. "It gets to the core of what Canada is. I specialized in Canadian studies at the University of Saskatchewan for 9 years, and nothing I read, nothing anyone said, nothing I wrote in any of that time approaches the kind of incision you've made into the truth of Canada with that statement." Christian lowered the television volume to 0 and began to sing. "As Canadians fight to the death to defend our Trudeau's disrespect of Negroes like us asleep on the bus, we travel in comfort to death." Christian stepped out from behind the bar, danced around the restaurant singing. His face shining, black as a raisin, he advances the progress of reason. A young purple woman, her name is Lucy Finlay, produced from her purple purse a purple phone and called the Vancouver police. Christian sang, his name a tall elegance and flagrant false feminism, fiery in the night a great beacon. As the police wrestled the bartender to the floor, he sang, oh, these sunny ways and dark overcast, blundering through the maze in a oneness with the past. Ow! Handcuffed, Christian was forced into the back of an ambulance, and soon found himself locked in a room smaller than the ambulance, a profound panic seizing the literary character, punching and kicking the walls and door in and out of this inhumanely uncomfortable non-space, yelling for his freedom, a clear sign of serious mental illness. The black bartender, who looked, the psychiatrist thought, uncannily like Frantz Fanon, was diagnosed with drug-induced psychosis, congenital schizomania, and drapetomania. He was given a medication called risperidone. It made the world a gray murk in which thought moved as clouds in slow motion, his deeper and truest self drowning amid the slowly moving cloudy thought. When groggy Norma Theriot awoke one morning beside her husband and found herself changed into a great growling grizzly bear, she lay a moment on her back. What's the matter with me, she thought, and remembering the general vicious hatred of bears, that bears exactly like her were murdered in the night, she thought, I am going to find myself soon in one of the camps, in deep terror. Norma flopped from the bed onto her paws, waking Mo from his dream of a stabler realism. What the fuck? And understanding the terrible power of her new presence, Norma now opened the bedroom door, an impossibility outside of Canadian unrealism, but permissible here, ran through their house, exited through the front door onto Woodland Drive, and ambled now bear-like, for she was now more bear than human, in the grey morning, walking on 4 paws, toward Commercial Drive. On the drive, the tall, bearded, and maned character our Norma first encountered was named Dan Behar. He was walking head down, fixated on the completion of a text message, when the newly metamorphosed grizzly bear clawed the prodigiously talented singer-songwriter across his handsome face. "Ah!" he screamed. Now she ran along the drive, Vancouverites running from the bear as she attempted, though instinct drove her out onto the road, blocking the traffic, to navigate the sidewalk. Her soul, feeling so human, within the bare body, her bare body driven by the homuncular soul within her bare brain, struggling within the great grizzly bear brain and body, madly roaring against the situation's unrealism and seeming arbitrariness. But what did I do to deserve this? Mo now called his father, since the transition from Maureen to Maurice Mo Theriot. He and his father had grown closer, talking every 2 or so weeks, mostly about sports, but that's neither here nor there. "Hello, Maurice?" Francois Theriot said in Mo's ear. "Dad, hi, it's an emergency. I think Norma's become a bear somehow. Should I call the police?" No, do not call the police." Francois lit a cigarette to calm himself down, breathing deeply the injurious chemicals. "Have you not seen Trudeau on the television?" "No, we don't watch television." "You don't follow the current events, the news?" No. "Trudeau, he goes on TV, he says, if you see a bear on the street, kill it." "Really?" "That is the essence of what he is saying, yes." Norma now stood amid the stopped traffic of Commercial Drive, watching Vancouver's police approach her. They regarded the grizzly bear for 7 or so seconds, began accosting instead 2 indigenous men begging on the sidewalk, handcuffing both men, kicking one repeatedly in the head as he screamed. Norma considered assisting the 2 men in their escape from the law, but her own deep essential fear of death and imprisonment intervened in her brief consideration. The bear disappeared from the scene, crossing First Avenue at the crosswalk. Running farther along the drive, the bear's instinct and thoughts slowly supplanting her own. As the bear approached Broadway, there was no longer any Norma. She'd receded into the bear's unconscious. Mo got off the phone with his father, still less certain of what to do. Surely that wasn't a racist descriptor. Dark mystery. Ow. AWOLing from the VGH psych ward was easy. Christian stepped out and onto the West 12th Avenue sidewalk for another 15-minute fresh air break, stood a while with his fellow psychotics out smoking their cigarettes, and walked away. Walked away, turning onto Ash Street, through this evening among hospital buildings down to Broadway. Nowhere to go, he said, and oh well. It seemed likely they'd find him at his apartment. Until he returned to the ward, there'd be nowhere to go. Oh well. He crossed Broadway at Cambie, walked to the BC liquor store, entered, and emerged with a can of yummy Blue Buck beer. It was evident to anyone that he'd AWOL'd from the hospital as Christian continued along Cambie downtownward, wearing still these comfy urine-colored VGH pajamas. Rain began gently to fall now over the small adventure. From the Cambie Bridge, Christian saw standing before him the buildings in the night, half occluded by rain mist. Vancouver. Under the great BC Place Stadium, Christian looked over to the tellus world of science, that orb's bright bulbs agleam, a blur in the rain. Beauteous. Christian crossed Pacific Boulevard, walked by the Rogers Arena along Abbott Street. The Woodward's buildings red W, slowly a twirl before him in the night sky. Threw his blue buck can into a receptacle, turning onto Kiefer Street. High on those many drugs the Vancouver downtown offers, neglected humanity stood, statues about him, or slowly danced, kinetic sculpture about him. But this is nothing, he thought, penetrating Chinatown. His destination, Main and Hastings, is ever the most populated by such abject humanity. Outside Owl Drugs, on the corner, Christian bought a gram of marijuana from a young woman. Her name was Ursula Horse, and a few rocks of crack from an older man named Sebastian Horse. Why my crack pipe is not confiscated's a mystery, but beautiful, thank God. Outside the Russian Hall, Christian smoked. First a joint, second a rock of crack, watching as a skunk approached in the moonlight and drizzle, bringing his flame to the crack and smoking. Christian squinting. Hey, the skunk said. Hey, Christian said, want to smoke some of this crack cocaine? The skunk neared Christian, accepted the pipe and lighter from his extended hand, lit and breathed deeply the drug. They sat on the concrete outside the hall, sharing this night. Has anyone ever told you you look exactly like Cornel West? The skunk said. But before Christian could reply, there descended from the stars 3 great spinning, blacker than Vancouver's night sky, black and blacker than space itself, discs of blackness, blackening the moment. And from one of these 3 discs, oh my, a great ringing beam of perfect blue light struck our Christian. He vanished within the sky blue beam, leaving a puzzled skunk and potent rock of crack. Christian regained his complete awareness in a small room, no door or window. The walls, floor, and ceiling brilliant gold. A profound panic seized the literary character, punching and kicking the smooth, brilliant golden walls. The spacecrafts zipped now by Mars, now through the Oort cloud, now light years from our familiar Milky Way.